Hi, David Bizard here, and you are watching PowerTech 10. In this episode, what we're going to do is to continue the Mission Impossible project that we're doing. I say we, that's Andy and I are doing with Uncle Tony. As you probably know, when this engine is finished, it's going to be raffled, auctioned off or whatever, but the proceeds are going to go to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. In this episode, we're going to look into some of the details of what we can and cannot do. A basic expansion on what we did in part one. We're going to start with some action at the carburetor, which is where the air goes in, and it's likely to be our greatest problem area when it comes to making the target 318 horsepower. As you can see, Andy and I were not overwhelmed with the flow figures, so let's get cracking and take a look at that. Well, here we are. We're about to start tackling all the problems that we're likely to confront during our project Mission Impossible. This episode is just going to be a quick rundown on some of the details that we've got to take care of, and they'll give you ideas of where we're going. So let's start off with the carburetor, cleaning it and checking the airflow. If you've followed our previous introductory deal, you may have noticed that the carburetor that we showed was pretty rubby. Well, the days of having good carburetor cleaner have gone long ago, right? I remember when I first came over here, you could get carburetor cleaners where you dunk the carburetor in it, leave it for an hour, and boy, it was down to bare metal. Now, the EPA's fixed that. So, this is what we're using. Paint stripper. Right? Now, it's not quite as good as a carburetor cleaner, but it will get your carburetor down to bare metal. So, this is what you use. Make sure you do it in a plastic bowl and don't flush it down the drain if you've got a septic tank. Right? Make sure that you dilute it by an incredible amount and then put it somewhere where it's safe. Now we've got the carburetor looking very decent here, and we've taken the throttle linkage off here, right, so that we can mount this on the bench and open the blades like this, right? As you can see, they're not very big. Also, the other thing is, so that you have a kind of a reference point here, we're going to flow it as if it was a 4-barrel performance carburetor. We're doing that because it will demonstrate just how much of a stranglehold this has got on the horsepower we're going to develop unless we really pay attention to it. Well, at this point, Andy and I are going to flow test the carburetor, right? We just got the flow bench set up, and we've got this makeshift spacer here with 2 holes in it that will allow for this to breathe through it, right, the carburetor. So Andy's going to operate the keyboard for it, and I'm going to hold the butterfly open on there. So here we go. I should say that we're going to flow this carburetor as if it was a 4-barrel. The reason we're doing that is so that you can directly relate to it, because nobody relates to a 2-barrel carburetor unless you're a 2-barrel racer. But to give you an idea of how bad this carburetor is, we are going to compare it on the same scale as a 4-barrel, right? I'm guessing it's going to be about 220, right? That's not very much for a 318-inch engine. A mini carburetor flows pretty much close to that, and it's feeding 850 cc. Here we go. Hit the torque. Well, this setup here is very crude compared with what we normally do, but you know, it's fine for the job. However, we did check the leakage on this plate here, right, and we have 15 CFM leakage. So that 271 odd CFM you saw on the computer, we have to subtract 15 from. So it looks like we have 256 CFM. That's a little better than I thought, but it's still way short of what we need. Well, Andy, one of the things that's obvious in here is they didn't spare crank strength.
No.
Right, this is a stout crank.
It is. I mean, this thing is beefy. I mean,
Yep.
for it to be in a passenger car 318, even though it's a cast crank, it's pretty heavy, or at least
Yeah.
my back says it's heavy.
Yeah. Well, Andy weighed it a little earlier on. It was 55 pounds. It's way heavier than a Chevy crank or a Ford crank. Now, we checked it out, and it's got a pretty lot of wear on it,
Yeah.
hasn't it?
It's going to have to be turned.
Yeah, we're going to have to grind the crank. So, since we've got to grind it, we're going to look into the possibility of stroking it. Now, we've got one other aspect we need to consider. This crank has got flat counterweights on the leading edges, right? It's got flat counterweights on all edges. And so, we've come up with a plan that can allow us to take off a considerable amount of metal here to knife edge it. And we'll show you what that is. Connecting rods. Let's do a little comparison here. Here's a small block Chevy 350 rod that I have reworked to lighten it, and I've got this down to about 570 grams. That's typically around about 40 less than stock. Now, this rod will take 6,800 RPM and 500 horsepower. Here is our Chrysler rod. Does that look like overkill to you? Does to me. So one of the things we can do, let me put this down, is we can remove a bunch of metal from here, we can remove a fair amount from there, and we can clean all these beams up, right? That will give us, if we use a light enough piston, that will give us the ability to take a whole bunch of weight out of the crankshaft counterweights. All that adds up to power. Okay, this is what we have for the rocker on a Chrysler engine, and it's quite ingenious actually, because they don't use the ball type rocker that we see on Chevrolet and Ford. They use a shaft, and they use the bottom half of this rocker as the bearing. So what happens is this allows it to use a shaft, but with no more parts than they would do if they used a ball. So that makes it a pretty stable system. Now what I want you to look at here is the wear pattern here, where we've created a pattern on the end of the rocker. Now this has got quite a lot of miles on it, and notice there's very little wear. Now what I want to point out is where that wear occurs on this radius here, right? Now it's probably set up for the least side thrust on the valve guides by the valve, right? So that geometrically, from the point of view of niceness, it operates right off the center of the valve, and it pivots about the center of this radius here. But that's not the best for us. If you look at this here, you'll see that we could go further around that radius. And what that does, if we're contacting the valve there, right, that's further from the center here than it is if we contact it there. So by altering the height of our rocker and the push rod length, we can maximize the ratio on this, and I'm pretty sure we can get something like about a half a point, or maybe 3/4 of a point. So if this was 1.5, we can probably get 1.57 out of it, nearly 1.6, by careful adjustment of the height of the rocker and the length of the push rod. Well, Andy, I think we should wrap this Mission Impossible episode up about here, right? What it's taught me is, and I think everybody watching will understand it, is that we do have a lot to do, right? We have got a major challenge here. Maybe I shouldn't have been so forward in saying, yeah, of course we can get 318 horsepower out of this engine. I had not reckoned on that carburetor.
Well, we still have some things that we can do to it, and who knows?
Yes, I think we'll get good results. But here's where I think it will score. When we do these modifications, the first thing we're going to do is put an adapter plate on and put a 4-barrel carburetor on, just an ordinary 650 vacuum secondary, whatever.
Nothing special, plain
Yeah,
Jane.
and I think we're going to see 100 horsepower increase, right? So anyway, that's down the road. So don't forget, when you're done with this, please make sure you subscribe, notify, share, and what have I left out, Andy?
Don't forget the super thanks. That helps both of
Oh
us
yeah,
keep
the
going.
super thanks as well. Right, that's it. So we'll see you when we get to the next episode, which will be shortly. Look for rod mods next.